Hello, my great and wonderful people. How una day today? I hope all of una day well. Today we get this video for our team. We're going to be saying one quickly leave make you watch concerning the things we're going to be saying they happen right now for inside this country, Nigeria. This video na interview when it be say our popular journalist when it be say it come outside to grant interview to this Judge Galloway when it be the former member of the House of Parliament for United Kingdom. He come outside to review some certain details of things when it be say yes, it happen concerning the Presidential Election Tribunal. When it be say yes, these judges they throw Nigeria name for inside monde internationally and locally. I beg make una pay attention to this video. Now, two professional investigative journalists now they engage for this interview. One now David Hundeyin and also Judge Galloway. Alright, I'll quickly make you watch this video, and before then I beg not forget to help us like this video, because the more you like this video, the more YouTube they recommend them to people. Now their own policy now it be that very one. Thank you so much for your support.
David Hundeyin joins us here again on the mother of all talk shows. Well, all eyes were on the judiciary, David. How did it work out?
Not very well, because as is now abundantly clear, the judiciary, as it's generously referred to, signaled to the world and to Nigeria specifically that even the letter of the law, the Nigerian Constitution itself, is essentially a series of suggestions that basically, in the interest of protecting the status quo, the judiciary will essentially make up rules that don't exist on the fly. They will nitpick technicalities which make very little sense to anyone, both within and outside the system. And they will basically work their way back from a predetermined answer to basically to arrive at a series of contrived questions. And the only purpose of doing all of this is to subvert justice. So what is abundantly clear now is that even going forward, even after this inevitably goes to the Supreme Court, the outcome isn't going to be any different, because the Nigerian judiciary has made a mockery of itself. Just to give you an idea of just how much of a mockery that we're talking about now. Some of the judgments, the rulings that were pronounced on the day were that, for example, on the issue of the supposed president's drug dealing forfeiture in the United States, where, as you mentioned earlier, he forfeited the sum of $460,000 to the U.S. government, being proceeds of heroin trafficking. The ruling completely sidestepped this issue, made no attempt to engage with that whatsoever, and instead referred to a letter which was supposedly written from the U.S. Embassy to the Nigerian Inspector General of Police in 2003, supposedly clearing somebody known as Bola Ahmad Tinibu of any sort of criminal records in the U.S. Meanwhile, the person who is sitting as the president, his name is Bola Ahmed Tinibu. So, and if you know anything about law, you would know that such a thing isn't a simple typo, right? It's a whole different person that was requested. The details of a whole different person were requested, and obviously they got back the answer they were looking for, which is obviously, there is no such thing, because no such person exists. And that's what the supposed judiciary relied on 20 years later in 2023 to basically pronounce him innocent. The judgment said, based on that letter, he had no case, and that the forfeiture is a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter, so it's fine. That's what the supposed Chief Justice of the Nigerian Appeal Courts ruled. So what has become abundantly clear is that, as it stands, Nigeria has no law. Nigeria has a series of written and codified suggestions, but anything and everything, depending on how much money you have, depending on how much influence you have, anything and everything will be allowed to stand up in court, no matter how stupid, no matter how fatuous the argument is. everything can fly. Nigeria essentially is no longer a country under law. Nigeria was never a particularly lawful society to begin with, but this, I think, has driven the final nail into the coffin. As I said, shortly after the ruling was put out, as it stands now, if I stand in the middle of the road in front of a TV broadcast camera and I'm holding a gun and I shoot people dead, and this is broadcast to millions of people in 4K UHD quality, I will be fine because I can go to court now. One of the rulings that was given, for example, was that the vice presidential candidate, who was actually not eligible to run because he had been registered as a contestant for another political office concurrently, which is illegal. The ruling given was that, well, as long he didn't do it intentionally, so it's fine. So essentially now what that means is the maxim which any lawyer anywhere in the world is raised with, which is that ignorance is no excuse under the law, has for the first time been turned on its head in Nigeria by the appeal court. So essentially, as I said, if I shoot a bunch of people dead in the streets in front of a TV camera, my argument in court can be I didn't do it intentionally, so I'm free to go. Another ruling that was given was that, well, the drug dealing forfeiture, the entity involved was the president's bank accounts and not the president's person. So the president's bank accounts forfeited the money.
That's the one. That one actually made me laugh out loud. The judges said that the money that was forfeited was a criminal, not the person who had the money in his bank account. In other words, it was these naughty $460,000 that are deserved of condemnation, not the person who had them resting in his account. To continue your analogy, you could claim that all these people you shot were not shot by you, they were shot by the gun.
Exactly. And apparently that would fly because that's the depth that we sunk to in the year 2023. So at this point, I think it's become clear now that if we're hoping for any kind of redemption from within the Nigerian system, it's probably not going to happen. At this point, I think it's the Nigerian people themselves, if they have any fight at all left in them, that have to look at what their contemporaries across the border in Niger have done and basically make up their minds. Are we going to consent to be mocked in this manner permanently, or are we going to do something and stand up for ourselves? Currently, there's a sort of mass paralysis sort of going around where everyone is like, oh, if we go out, they're going to shoot us dead in the streets, which they did 3 years ago. There's going to be a massacre, and blah, blah, blah. And, you shouldn't be sitting in the UK, wherever you are, telling people to go out on the streets. Why don't you come home and lead the protest yourself? Which, I mean, I've done that already before. But anyway, apparently I'm expected to come back and, to do that again. And generally, it just seems to me as if, I think until the people themselves decide that they have had enough, this mockery is going to continue because clearly Tinibu himself has no intention of letting go. He clearly has no iota of shame, personal embarrassment, anything like that. He genuinely doesn't care. And the judiciary has also made it clear that they are just as shameless as he is. So essentially, the entire Nigerian establishment has made it very clear that it lacks a single modicum of shame, that it is willing to do anything in public. I mean, if you watch the proceedings, you'd have seen toward the end, there was I think the only female justice on the panel. She actually she raised her voice and went into a rant and was screaming at the petitioners and essentially berating them for bringing up the petition, and was basically saying things like, did you think that threats from social media would move us to give another judgment? And it was almost as if Tinibu himself was speaking to the petitioners, and this is a judge. So it's become clear that the Nigerian system, if there is no Nigerian system, it's been completely captured. So the Nigerian people themselves at this point need to decide if they're going to consent to be led by their inferiors, or if they're going to do something about it. Ultimately, I don't think there's it's a decision for a journalist or for a politician like Peter Obi to make. I think it's the Nigerian people themselves who have to make that decision, if they ever make that decision.
Going to the Supreme Court now is just kicking it all into the long grass, isn't it? It's just putting it off for another 12 months.
It's not even going to be up to 12 months. I think it's like just because I think the rule is that 60 days from the ruling, which was this past week, is the deadline for a verdict from the Supreme Court. So we're looking at sometime in November potentially. But yes, I definitely think the Supreme Court, I actually think the Supreme Court is even less likely to deliver a sensible verdict than the appeal court because you know the Chief Justice of the Federation, by the way, his name is Kayode Ariwola. He is actually a very close ally and a personal friend of Bola Tinubu himself. You know, and rumor has it that he was actually placed in that position due to lobbying from Tinibu back when Buhari was the president. So I think anyone expecting a sensible verdict from Tinubu's close personal ally is, you know, it's not being realistic. I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be an even bigger mockery at the Supreme Court. What I am looking forward to, however, is seeing what his ruling on the forfeiture would be. And why I'm looking forward to it is that in 2014, this exact Justice Kayode Ariwola delivered a ruling, which is, you know, which has been circulated very widely, a ruling stating that forfeiture is itself the act of forfeiture after the commission of a crime constitutes in itself some form of criminal conviction, and that forfeiture is proof of criminal activity. That was a ruling that he delivered. So I'm looking forward to seeing him essentially roll back his own earlier ruling and state that forfeiture is something else now, that, okay, it's the bank accounts that are responsible and not the individual. I'm looking forward to him doing that. I know he will do that because clearly the Nigerian judges have no shame. He's definitely going to do that, right? I completely expect him to do that, but I want to get it on camera. So which is why I said I'm really looking forward to doing that. It's going to be like a seminal moment in Nigerian history, the point when it became clear to everyone that from the mouth of the Chief Justice of the Federation that Nigeria has no law. It's not a free-for-all. Everybody go outside and do whatever they want to do. It doesn't matter anyway. We're looking forward to that.
Nigeria, Nigeria is a great country. Its people, great people, and so numerous, so populous, so hardworking, so prosperous. But they've never produced a political leader of the stature of some of these smaller, poorer African countries. Why do you think that is?
I think that's because the manner in which Nigeria came to be and in which it came to gain its independence was remarkably different from its neighbors, for example. So Ghana, for example, there was your conventional sort of anti-colonial independence struggle, and then there was this sort of charismatic leader that came up out of that struggle, a guy called Kwame Nkrumah, who remains a sort of legendary figure in Ghana till today, even though he's long dead. And the country sort of coalesced around a common vision for what an independent future looks like. In Nigeria, there was no such thing. It might surprise you to know that I think the year was 1955, when the motion for independence was first moved in the then Nigerian House of Parliament, fully half of the country actually opposed the motion. That might sound surprising to anyone who is familiar with African post-colonial history. Why on earth would members of an African parliament oppose independence? But that's the very sort of peculiar makeup of Nigeria, that the way it was put together. I'm not a fan of blaming the British for things that they did 60, 100 years ago. But unfortunately, that's just the reality, that the way Nigeria was put together by the British made it such that there was a very deliberate power imbalance between ethnicities which had almost sort of equal population. So it was sort of like the classic divide and rule thing. So instead of having a country where maybe there's a clear majority and people can sort of coalesce around a shared vision, or, you know, even if it's equally sized groups, they were sort of left to sort of figure it out on their own. Instead, these three groups were sort of pit against each other by the British, which is like the classic empire building way of doing things, so that you get to remain in charge because these three idiots are fighting themselves. That's how Nigeria was put together by the Brits, unfortunately. And all these years later, unfortunately, Nigeria still pretty much remains very much the way it was in the 60s, whereby even though Nigeria has close to 500 plus ethnic groups. They're like basically three majority populations, and they essentially, till today, remain at loggerheads. They're not really able to agree on anything economically, politically. So the country remains sort of in a de facto state of war, which is why every time there's an election, people die because it's actual ethnic warfare every time it's time to select a new leader. Part of the reason why Peter Obi's candidacy was such a phenomenon was because he comes from the Igbo ethnic group, which for if you're familiar with the Civil War history, rightly or wrongly, Nigeria's first ever coup, military coup in 1966, was labeled as an Igbo coup. And as a result of that, the Igbos were deliberately politically sidelined for many decades in the Nigerian political mainstream. There's never been an Igbo head of state since 1966. And he seemed to come out of nowhere. And for the young people of Nigeria, people like myself who were, we never experienced the Civil War. We never grew up in that era. I was born in 1990. This was ancient history by the time I was born. We just saw a competent administrator who could be a good leader. But for the people from older generations, there are all these issues which still exist in their minds, which continue to be a factor in the political equation. So for some people, it was, oh, he comes from this part of the country, so under no circumstances must he, get into that seat. So there's all sorts of complications, making it such that it's very difficult for Nigeria as a country to sort of evolve a common vision for what it even imagines Nigeria should look like in the future. So if you ask someone, I'm from Lagos, it's in the southwest, the largest city in Nigeria. So if you had to ask me what my vision for Nigeria ideally should be over the next 30 to 50 years, I could spend an hour talking about things that I would like to see, certain types of infrastructure investments, and how, the sectors that the government should focus on, direct investment that should be made in education and healthcare, changes in law. I could tell you all of these things. But if you ask someone in Kano, which is in the northwest, what's their vision for Nigeria in the next 30, 50 years, they'll tell you something completely different, because they come from a completely different context where the primary consideration is, for many of them, the religion, which is a particularly conservative form of Islam, which, by and large, doesn't tend to coexist well with its neighbors. So there are those issues. If you had asked someone from Onitsha, which is in the southeast, what's their vision for Nigeria, they'll probably give you a different answer as well. So Nigeria is essentially 3 or 4 countries struggling to fight each other, but it's one sort of nation state. So internally, it's never really worked. Externally, obviously, the world only sees a bunch of Africans from West Africa. We're all one nationality. We all carry one green passport. Internally, it's a lot more complicated. So unless there's a significant sort of social and mental revolution that takes place, whereby the young people who are by far the majority of the country's population, as much as 70% of the country's population, decide that they want a break from the past, and that whatever the British did or didn't do, whatever the Ahmadu Bellos and the Ojukus, whatever happened between the 1950s and the 1970s, all of that doesn't concern us now, because we live in 2023. Our lives are a certain way now. We want to move forward into the future, and this is what we want. Until that happens, it's going to be very unlikely that Nigeria will coalesce around a sort of charismatic figure, sort of Lee Kuan Yew or Kwame Nkrumah or Nelson Mandela. It's unlikely. It's not impossible, because we've seen the emergence of Peter Obi, which was not supposed to happen. So I think we're already seeing the green shoots, some sort of hope. However, as I said earlier, it's up to the young Nigerians themselves to take this to the end, because I think we've used the system as far as the system is willing to let us take it to. We're told after the protest movement, we're told, don't protest, go, form yourselves into a political formation, line up behind the candidate. We've done that, and we actually won the election, and the result was taken from us. We went to court, which is what you were supposed to do, and the court has ruled that, well, it's the gun that shot the people, not the person holding it. So at this point, I think it's the Nigerians themselves who then have to look at the situation and say, okay, we've done everything we're supposed to do. We've played by the rules, and clearly the rules are not designed to work. So now we have to work outside the rules. We have to rebel against the system, because the system is designed to keep us in a certain way. So until they make that decision, we will keep on having this conversation, unfortunately.
All right, my great and wonderful people, I believe say all of you don't listen to this very interview. You know the reason why we bring this interview come to you. Now the statement when we say this man make, which is David Hundeyin, when it talks say by this time when we say we did so, Nigerians don't try every miss by thing when we say yes, we're supposed to liberate ourselves from the hand of these people when they call themselves leaders. Now, as everything don't fail, it's now less for Nigerians to determine whether we will continue to follow them like Zubi, or we will lift up our head to decide, say enough, don't they enough. And when we decide like that, not be law will give us the right to get what we want, not be the police, not be the army, and not be the international community when they say we they cry to on daily basis. Now we must stand up to make sure, say yes, we take the responsibility to tell these people, say enough, don't they enough. And when that issue will happen, a lot of things will go wrong. Go yes, a lot of people will shed tears, a lot of people will run exile, a lot of people will die. But remember, say freedom no will ever come without it be say drastic thing not happen. And if you refuse to stand up to that responsibility, come another 100 years, now this is story, now it will still live for our children to continue to the talk. All right, now so talking concerning this matter, we'll leave you to share your own opinion with us in the comment section. And the last statement not pass, we say, not believe say this battle na Peter Obi battle or Atiku battle or any other person battle. No, na Nigerians battle na it be. All right, we'd like to draw the line of this very broadcast here. We'll see you again when we see you. Remember, we love you all. Bye-bye.